closely contested in its political history, with the opposition party winning after a second vote. Now, the government launched the Medium-Term National Development Plan 2019 to 2023, which maps out immediate and long-term development goals and commitments to transform from a fragile state into a stable democracy. But the U.S. Department of State 2021 country report on human rights practices in Sierra Leone said significant human rights issues included credible reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings by the government, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment by government or on behalf of government, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrest or detention, serious government corruption, existence of laws criminalizing consensual same-sex sexual conduct between adults, although the laws were not enforced, and existence of the worst forms of child labor. The government took some steps to investigate, prosecute, and punish officials who committed abuses or engaged in corruption, but impunity, the report says, persisted. The Millennium Challenge Corporation scorecard for 2022 under the Rule Justly category puts political rights at 92%, civil liberties at 92%, control of corruption at 83%, rule of law at 63%, and freedom of information at 90%. With this good and bad picture being painted of the nation's democracy, it begs the question, 5 years on, where is Sierra Leone democracy and good governance standing? My name is Samuel Wise-Bangura, and this is AYVN Sunday. All right, good evening and a very warm welcome to AYVN Sunday. Today we are reviewing Sierra Leone's democracy and good governance standing the last 5 years under the regime of the Sierra Leone People's Party. And you can follow us on DSTV channel 399, on radio FM 101.7, on local channel, channel 33, on Facebook, AYV News Facebook page. Drop your comments, drop your questions. We would find time to go through some of them on that platform. And later on, definitely we would factor them into the conversation. As always, we're being people who are in touch with the issues. I have a star-studded panel to help me unpack the conversation for the next 2 hours. I have Sidi Yaya Tunis, the National Publicity Secretary of the Opposition All People's Congress Party. Sidi, good evening and welcome to AYVN Sunday.
Good evening, Samuel. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Right, I have the nation's Minister of Information and Communications, Mohammed Rahman Swaray. Good evening and welcome to you, Mr. Minister.
Good evening, Samuel. Good evening, Sierra Leoneans.
Right, I have from the University of Sierra Leone and Richmond University, Professor Jimmy Kandeh, political scientist. Prof, good evening and welcome to AYVN Sunday.
Yeah, thanks for having me here again.
All right, let's start off, Prof. Let's have an understanding of really when we talk about democracy and good governance in Sierra Leone's context. Where do we peg that, and what is the model that best suits Sierra Leone?
That's a kind of loaded question. That will take me quite a while to try to answer, but I'll simplify my answer and try to break it down so that the ordinary viewer could readily keep up with what we're talking about and discussing here.
Right.
Now, I will characterize Sierra Leone, or call Sierra Leone, a quasi-democracy, a pseudo-democracy, an electoral democracy that is still fragile. We have not consolidated democracy yet. And democratic consolidation is always a work in progress. Even in America, we have democracy backsliding. And as Stephen Levitsky, one of the leading scholars on democratic breakdowns, points out, whereas historically democracies were aborted as a result of coups d'etats or military interventions, now it is elected officials who are the primary, causes of authoritarian reversals or democratic breakdowns. That is, the ballot box today can be the route to democratic breakdown. Simply electing a leader does not guarantee a democratic consolidation. So at the state at which our democracy is very fragile, elections are very important to democracy, but they do not constitute democracy. They do not make a country a full-fledged democracy. It takes a long time for democracies to mature, and we are at the early stages. And I think the question that needs to be posed is whether or not our democracy is improving.
So
the
just
quality of democracy.
Just before we get into
Yeah.
into that, whether or not we're moving from being a fragile democracy to a more mature world.
democracy.
Let me ask the question. You just talked about how elections in themselves do not guarantee democracy. But do we agree that elections are fundamental ingredients to consolidating the democracy?
Elections are part of the process of democratization, right? Democratization has 3 steps. The first step is the authoritarian decompression or the delegitimation of the authoritarian regime. That's the first step. The second step are elections, right? You hold elections and you inaugurate a democratically elected government. We've passed those 2 first steps. The third step, which is the most difficult, is the consolidation of democracy. And according to mainstream democratic theory, the consolidation of third-wave democracies will depend largely on the degree of economic development, because it is economic development that can secrete a democracy. Democracy does not produce development. Democracy is the answer to tyranny. It's not the answer to anything else. The development, on the other hand, can create the fundaments that can produce democracy, that can secrete democracy. And that might take a long time. But governance also, and we'll get to that later on, governance can be damaged by democratic backsliding, as well as by the lack of development. And there are many ways that democracies can backslide, even using the Constitution, by violating the Constitution. That's one way democracies can begin to backslide, because people begin to lose faith in the Constitution, even in the electoral processes. If the electoral malpractices are such that they nullify legitimate votes, and people begin to lose confidence in the electoral mechanism as a way of changing government, that's when you begin to threaten, some kind of authoritarian reversal.
At this point, what are the indicators saying? Are we moving from a fledgling democracy to one that is more matured, or are we really consolidating our democracy by our practices as a nation?
I think the quality of governance may be undermining our democracy.
In what sense?
Right. But first, let me touch on democracy, the quality of governance. I mean, when you talk about governance, you look at some of the metrics, right, of good governance, right? And I can run your viewers through that briefly, that it starts with constitutionalism, right? Respect for the Constitution, right? Yes, you might argue that, I don't want to get into name calling and all of that stuff, but the past 2 governments, have played games with the Constitution and with the process even in Parliament of redoing a parliamentary representation. I have an individual, I think, representing, the Aberdeen area, who is very popular there, but was kicked out of Parliament, because what was it, a by-election process? And the judiciary can also be used in a way that can undermine democracy, because without an independent judiciary, the rule of law, transparency, and the kind of accountability mechanisms we've been talking about, you're not going to have good governance. But good governance also talks about inclusivity. You need a government that is inclusionary. And we've had in this country governments that come in with a northernization agenda and others that come in with a southernization agenda. I don't think any Sierra Leonean should feel less of a Sierra Leonean because of the region or ethnic group to which they belong. And that smacks of lack of inclusivity. And we can go down the line, transparency, accountability, the absence of reserved domains. That is, people who are above and beyond the reach of the law, so to speak. And we still have that today, in this country. But what is critical to good governance in our context of abject poverty is social provisioning. A government that is active in providing basic social amenities, because our people are poor. They can't lift themselves up.
You're banking the consolidation on the provision of basic services.
Well, not just that, because you need an effective state. Let me point that out. Without an effective state, neither democracy can be consolidated, nor development is possible. So you really need an effective state. And we can quibble about how you make the state effective. But a state is made effective by enhancing its capacity. And you enhance the capacity of state institutions by allowing those institutions as much autonomy to operate independently of special interests that may be ensconced in the state or are inhabiting state institutions.
What's your
But it's not just capacity, it's also resources, a combination of resources and institutional capacity that can make the state effective. But more importantly, let me finish my point.
Go ahead.
You enhance governance, you enhance state capacity by allowing institutions to operate in a manner that is responsive to the needs, the basic needs, the interests, and the aspirations of the mass of our people. That's how you institutionalize power.
So I want to ask you directly, just quickly before I move over to the other panelists. I want to ask you now directly, what's your assessment? You talked about the rule of law. The judiciary should be independent, parliament should be independent from the executive. What's your assessment of these three organs? Are they operating independently to a point that they help to create the effective state you're talking about?
No, I don't think so. I don't think parliament is a effective check at all on the executive. I mean, parliament is an appendage of the executive. It did not start now. I mean, let me make that clear. As is often said, it's a pox on both houses, right? It did not start now. But parliament and the judiciary, I mean, it's likewise, the parties in power. Look at what happened in the constitutional case, the Sam Sumana case. They just railroaded the judiciary. So that's not a judiciary you can place your hat on. Kaba was more inclusive. There were serious problems under Kaba as well. But in terms of constitutionalism and inclusivity and trying to build institutions, emphasize institutions rather than personalities, I think he did much better than his successors.
All right. Let me quickly bring in Sidi Ayatulis. So, Sidi, the last time we started having this conversation about assessing government 5 years on democracy and good governance, your point or the yardstick you used to determine that was the State of Human Rights Report 2021 from the U.S. Department of State, and I also took an excerpt from that. But at this time, where would you peg, or how would you describe the nation's democracy in the last 5 years? Where would you put that?
I think, thank you very much, Samuel. I mean, like you rightly stated, and, I think we are seeing a nosedive as far as our democracy is concerned. And I'll say this, you had Prof bring out some issues as far as democratic governance is concerned. First, you have to look at the Constitution itself, which I believe the current Constitution, the 1991 Constitution, which ushered in the current democracy that we are practicing in Sierra Leone. And you look at the provisions within that Constitution as to, makeup of our governance system, i.e. the judiciary, the, executive and the legislature, and how people are elected or appointed into offices under, those three arms of governance. And clearly, we had an election that ushered in a new government, like I stated earlier. And just after the election, we got the results that clearly stated who controls the executive and who controls the judiciary. And the manipulation started immediately. First, with the election of the Speaker of Parliament, wherein the police was invited, kicked out elected members of Parliament so that the Speaker can be elected. And we went through that. A year later, sitting and elected members of Parliament who have served in the well of Parliament for over a year were also kicked out through the judiciary. But the interesting point there is the law was clearly ignored, as to how they could be replaced. So even if we say the judiciary was right to kick them out, but then their replacement or the manner in which they were replaced was wrong by any means, by any law that you can look at in this country, whether it is by the Constitution or the Electoral Act of 2012. It's all wrong because the judiciary has no law that supports them in appointing members of parliament. But then that goes beyond it. You know, democracy, it's all about, you know, people having participation in the governance of the country. And that is why institutions are created to strengthen our democratic system. In our case, we have the elections management bodies that comprises the Electoral Commission, the PPRC, political parties, and other democratic institutions, National Commission for Democracy, civil society, the media. We all, and even our development partners who support, you know, electoral processes, i.e. free, credible, transparent elections. We are all supposed to form part of the elections management bodies. And our laws are very, very much deliberate in creating these institutions. One, Prof talked about consolidation. It is important that we continue to consolidate our democracy. And how do we do that? Through inclusive dialogue. It is no magic. You know, there will always be disagreement.
Are there incidents where perhaps you're now claiming that you've not been included in?
Oh, of course, many.
Cite many. Some.
Many. One, when it came to the issue of the census, we were very clear, our positions were very clear because of the many challenges that we had. You know, putting together, you know, what could bring out a real census to serve the purpose the government claimed they were doing census for, midterm census. They claimed it was for development purpose. All right, by the time the process started, we had so many issues, technical, procedural issues, legal issues. Even the manner in which it was pronounced was constitutionally not right. We raised it, and the census process dragged on until almost to the end of 2021, 2022, which was no longer midterm. And at that time, we were preparing for elections. We were ignored. They went ahead, despite all of the issues and we all saw the chaos it created in Parliament, trying to force through, you know, the instrument that brought in the census. It created so much tension in Parliament, so much mistrust among members of Parliament, and even the populace. And look at what happened in the end. We know we did not have a proper census done, and at the end of the day, Statistics Sierra Leone just went with the formula, think of any number, and they gave us a figure that did not match the population of this country. And at the end of the day, it became very clear that the census was actually for electoral purposes. Had we not done voter registration exercise that really rubbished the census figures, we would have been in a mess, and we're still in a mess as a country, by the way, because now we have violated the law which says if you want to reallocate seats, a certain census figure will have to be used. But because the 2021 census was not credible enough, the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone had to use two census figures. Add the 2015 census figure to the 2021 census figure, divided by two to get the mean. And that is wrong. Constitutionally, procedurally,
are these democratic institutions not independent? Because when you talk about you being left out, you've been excluded from these processes, Statistics Sierra Leone, for example, had its technical committee for which the APC was represented. Dr. Richard Kandeh was your representative in that.
Statistics Sierra Leone invited us once to a meeting, and we raised this issue. Since then, we were never invited again. We wrote several letters, and it is not only us, even other political parties and civil societies. You know, we were never, ever invited again. You know, but that goes beyond the point. You know, in the past, Samuel, we've had disagreements, And we have gained accolades as a model for democracy because past governments were very much engaging. As much as we had our challenges, we are still, a democracy that was growing, but we tried as much as we can to consolidate, to ensure inclusivity, even in terms of governance. And which is why when, for example, the Ernest Bai Koroma government was in power, there was constant engagement with the opposition. We had times when we had tensions between the ruling and the opposition. They will meet at that level.
And that's the inclusion you're talking about?
That is just one. And in terms of even appointments, the laws are very clear as to how you appoint people into these offices. Take, for example, the appointment of the chairman of the PPRC and even the chief electoral commissioner. The law is clear that there has to be consultation with leaders of all registered political parties. And you saw also what happened with the current appointment. It was more of an information shared to the leaders of political parties than consultation. And that also created a lot of mistrust and all contributes to undermining the gains that we have made democratically. The issues are many.
So, we have to get into the issues. But just before I move over to the Minister of Information, how would you describe the current state of democracy and good governance? Are we improving? Are we growing?
I think from where we were, from the last two governments, President Ahmed Tijan, I talked about how democracy was ushered in. President Ahmed Tijan Kaba came in just after the peace. He consolidated the peace and built democratic institutions. Dr. Ernest Bai Koroma came in, built on those institutions, gave them more powers, where it was necessary, review the law so that they could enjoy more independence. And it was no magic. We had accolades. President Barack Obama referred to Sierra Leone as one of the models in Africa for strong and good democracy. The evidence is there. And under this administration, we are seeing our democracy deteriorating. I started stating the evidences, and as we go further into the programs, more and more evidences will be highlighted.
Let me get a precursory remark from the Minister of Information, Rahman. So, Professor Kandeh has put into context his thoughts about democracy and the quality of leadership and governance. And Sidi has made it very clear to us that the democratic credentials are deteriorating. The state is deteriorating in terms of democracy and good governance, especially since you took over. So where is democracy under your leadership?
Also, I clearly understand the thoughts. Professor Kandeh is an academic, and that's what we know him for. Sidi will never concede anything here. Under the administration, everything was hunky-dory and everything was fine. So, but it's good for a discussion like this to have a baseline. Where did we start off from? So we all know, Professor Kandeh has hinted to that, democracy had a very deep stab by then. But as well as setting the context, in our recent times, post-war or during the Civil War, hate or like him, President Julius Maada Bio, under very difficult circumstances, kept the NPRC pledge, ending the war. He did not end the war, but they put the basic modalities in place for democratic peace talks to ensue so that it could lead to the end of the war. After that, they wanted to conduct free and fair elections and hand over to a democratically elected government. With all of the trappings of power, with the support of the military, he still went ahead and handed over power. So he had a very vested interest in keeping this country not only safe, but also democratic, right? Fast forward in 2018, he is elected by popular will to become president of the Republic of Sierra Leone. He has put in place very, very, very profound reforms, phenomenal reform processes. We all know, I know since growing up as a boy, we know the criminal libel has been an albatross around the neck of practitioners in Sierra Leone. Bad politicians have always used it to mellow down journalists, arrest them on Friday, ensure they don't have access to bail at the weekend, they sleep there, they are released by Monday, following pressure, both local and international.
By bad politicians, you mean?
By bad politicians, including APC practitioners over the years. But that's another matter. I simply want to insist that a lot of progressive things have happened under this administration, right? We have been able to make democracy form the very basis of our existence as a government. So President Bio, even though he was well lampooned, ridiculed, castigated by unprofessional sections of the press, like I always say, he still went ahead and repealed the criminal libel law. I stand here very proud to note that 4.5 years on, there is no journalist in jail on account of the practice of their profession. There is nobody who has been arrested and incarcerated because they have abused, because of free speech, right? So that's very important to note.
So before you just continue mentioning the games, let's understand, you talked about having a baseline.
Yeah.
Let's have an understanding of where did you meet democracy and good governance? That's
what I'm saying. These are the core ingredients. Free speech is enshrined in the Constitution, right? So that's a rights issue, and they are the core components of a democracy, right? So that was not there. We brought it against a lot of, even within cabinet there were, quite serious opposition. Out here, you supported us variously, but ensured that was best for our country. And by repealing, we were able to bring our law in line with 12 other international. We had violated many international commitments by simply keeping the criminal libel on the books. Its repeal brought us in line with 12 other international covenants and treaties that we had signed up to, but that we had paid no heed to before. So this was a good day for our country, and we are celebrated the world over. After that, subsequent press freedom ratings, right? Sierra Leone has continued to do very well, like we've never done before since independence. So in terms of law reform, there are many other things we have also done. In terms of, when you mention education, for example, you're talking about the radical reform. And he spoke about rights, inclusive growth, inclusive development. Government should not be about furthering the nest of a few people. So President Bio brought in the free quality education that is giving meaning to the right of every Sierra Leonean to have access to education. So today, every Sierra Leonean born within, the shores of our country has a free chance to attend school, at least in the public school, right? I mean, the debate can go on as to other things, but this is a fact. As I speak here, we have about 3.1 million Sierra Leoneans, all of them paid for by the government of Sierra Leone. For those guys who end up doing STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, agriculture, and mathematics, even through university, they can still continue to enjoy that. I mean, if this is not good enough, it's not inclusive enough, you will have to tell me what else is more inclusive than this. But you talk about anti-corruption, we have continued the war against corruption. Don't we still have challenges? Of course we do. We are not perfect, but it's been a well-fought fight. We are on it, for which we have continued to pass many global anti-corruption indicators. Right? The MCC, for example, I think the last one were in the 80s. We never passed it before we came to government. So every year, 4 years running, we have continued to pass it.
It's part of the challenges, the selective justice that Prof talks about?
No. Don't lead me. Let me come. My trail of thoughts, So we are saying, I've seen government ministers rounded up, right? I sit as Minister of Information and Communications. I mean, I had corruption right in my ministry. I prosecuted it. Those guys lost their jobs. They served jail time and all of that, right? This is not a Hollywood movie. This is a recent experience, right? So things are happening. But if we approach it with the Sierra Leonean mindset, as long as in the court of public opinion you are guilty, you have to be found guilty before we realize that the war on corruption is heightening, then we have a problem. We need to address that. So that's what is happening. Access to justice. It is a fact that today we have sitting judges, high court judges in every district in this country. Before we took over, you had huge backlog of cases because you relied on circuit judges to go around, something that did not happen all the time. So today, in every district, you have sitting high court judges. You have resident state councils. So you can't say, state council not count this week, we don't adjourn the case. So what is this underlining? the access to justice, we are continuing to push the boundaries, the frontiers. Does that mean there are no issues relating to justice? There are, but there have been, profound, commitments to improving that landscape, because we believe justice delayed is justice denied. So these high court judges are residents. You have resident state councils just so that they can expeditiously dispense justice without fear and favor. I think that's very important. You talk about human rights. In terms of human rights, we have continued to maintain a grade A rating for our National Human Rights Commission, right? We have set up various commissions to ensure that, human rights are respected every inch of the way. We have mentioned inclusivity. I know the APC is being the biggest threat to our democracy, both in and out of government. Why do I say so? Just to take you down memory lane, in 2007, on the eve of the announcement of the election results, the former president, Dr. Ernest Bai Koroma, was on the BBC. In the BBC interview, he noted that if the elections that year did not go his way, he would make the country ungovernable. That is a threat to the very institution you are meant to be nourishing. That is a serious breach, right? So fast forward several years down the line, 2018, again on the eve of the announcement of the results, now APC candidate Samora also said it will cause all sorts of problems. So when some of these problems, these threats to democracy happen, you have ventriloquists and proxies seated abroad, threatening the peace and stability of this country, inciting people to take over the seat of power. You just want to fit this into a narrative. They have probably had a queue. Yeah? So these things are very important for us as a government. You mentioned, we have also mentioned democracy must work for everybody. We know this. The UK Foreign Secretary was here a couple of days ago. Like us, he also noted that the twin global problems of COVID and the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, have been at the very center of, difficult challenges for the whole world. For example, in Sierra Leone, it's translating to high commodity prices, including petroleum products and the basic staple food. So these things are happening. But even in the midst of that, just so that listeners and viewers could understand, when we had COVID here, government activated many social interventions. Number one, we gave direct cash transfers to people living with disabilities across this country. This is from Bumaru to Falaba. We did that across this country, and the beneficiaries are quite grateful. Apart from that, since the service sector was one of the hardest hit, we ensure that we pay 3 months' salaries to those working for hotel and other sectors. That was across the board. It was not APC, it was not SLP. These were Sierra Leoneans. When we provide services or when we deliver, we want to ensure that, it's inclusive. Every Sierra Leonean is able to have a fair chance of benefiting from that. Again, we ensured during the same period, just so that, Professor Kandeh mentioned inclusivity, you also did, right? So I want to stress how inclusive we have been in terms of ensuring that every Sierra Leonean benefits from our policy interventions. What did we do when COVID struck? We made resources available to the tune of $50 million to commercial banks so that those in the business of importing essential commodities will not be starved of much needed foreign exchange. Already we had rude disruptions of global supply chains, but wanted to ensure that, we had enough of the things we needed here. To an extent, you saw vehicles coming from Guinea, Liberia, queuing up to buy rice and other essentials here. We we got that very right. We did not sleepwalk into it at all. It was as a result of very, very scrupulous planning. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question.
Please do.
On the quality of governance, I know we've always talked about separation of powers, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Yeah. But now the claim is that Professor Kandeh mentioned Parliament being an appendage to the executive, the judiciary not being independent, so being used as a political tool already. So how are these...
Quality of governance.
Yes. How are these...
Okay, I'll speak to that in a bit.
How are they helping to undermine democracy or consolidate democracy?
Okay, so you asked for the quality of governance. I'll anchor it my own way. Before I walk into the ambush, I'll come back. to it. Yes, Samuel? In your very intro, you have been quite generous. You've done a lot of work for us. You have put down scientific indicators, right? For example, you did note that on freedom of information, Sierra Leone scored 98% on the MCC scorecard. MCC scorecard, the people who do that scorecard are not residents in Tium or in Bo or Pujen, where I come from, right? These are globally repeated institutions. I mean, whatever arguments we might have against this, another matter. But until you give alternative outlets for grading, that is what it is. You also mentioned, in terms of access to, you mentioned also the need for, I don't know. So the other thing you mentioned that has to do with, yes, political rights, 94%, right? 94% political rights, civic rights. Okay, let me read directly from the scorecard. Primary education expenditure 100%, 22%. That is inclusive. We want inclusive development so that if my son goes to school, other Sierra Leonean kids must also be able to go to school. Freedom of information I mentioned 98%, political rights 94%, civil liberties 92%. So I wouldn't want my brother here to say their civil liberties, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and others are not being respected. These are external examiners.
In terms of freedom of information.
I'll come back. Rule of law, we are cruising at 65%. We still think there are more things to do because we are not satisfied with a mere 65%. Even with freedom of information, where we've scored 98%, we'll continue to push the boundaries to ensure that we'll get 100% next time around, right? So this is the state of it. While speakers before me have noted that democracy is in recession in many parts of the world, Sierra Leone continues to make substantial gains. It is under this administration that we have abolished the death penalty. In and out of cabinet, there are a lot of reservations, a lot of apprehensions, right? But the president was very clear. Democratic governments should not participate in killing their own citizens, for no matter for what reasons.
Just before
right?
we get to the other laws, let me quickly bring in Professor Kandeh. You've listened to the submissions from both CD and the minister and how they've been able to paint the nation's democracy. It's good and bad depending on who speaks. But with the fundamentals and the realities on ground, where are those submissions positioning the nation, the nation's democracy and good governance? With some of the indices the minister has mentioned, CD also cited some incidents that have helped in undermining democracy in his own context. So where do we get all of these things to see how the nation's democracy can be consolidated?
Again, as I pointed out earlier, consolidation is always a work in progress. Otherwise, America's democracy will not be backsliding. And I don't think the minister should take it personally if some of us conclude that our democracy here is backsliding or we question the quality of our democracy, particularly when you take into account the role of the judiciary in the expulsion of these MPs from parliament. It's just one thing there. But what it tells us basically is that you can manipulate these institutions. These institutions lack the kind of autonomy that they need to operate, effectively. But not only that, look at the Auditor General's office. She and her assistant had been dismissed. The Momo guy, I met him once in London, very, very impressive guy. They have been dismissed from office, and no case, credible case has been brought against them. If there was one, bring it against them. That is one of the effective horizontal accountability mechanisms that remain, because I don't really include the ACC under that because that's a partisan position. The ACC commissioner is a party guy. They go after people they want to go after and they overlook others that they don't think that
To
they
be
should
fair
go after.
to the commissioner, there are people
Yeah, there are a
they've
few
gone
cases that
after,
they've gone
in the
after.
current,
Yes,
in the
yes,
current
you're right,
regime.
You're right, but not high up. But I'm not going to go there. You know, let me just leave it there.
Ministers have been arraigned before the ACC.
Huh?
They have been suspended from office
Okay, can I
and they've been
just
prosecuted.
finish?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I did not interrupt you,
Go ahead.
Mr. Minister.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Can
sorry,
I
Jimmy.
just continue?
Sorry, Jimmy.
Okay, that's fine. So, again, let me just run through some of these issues that the two gentlemen raised, right? I just want to address them. First, Mr. Tunis, who believes that EBK built on institutions that Kaba tried to put in place. I don't know what institutions EBK built. EBK personalized political power. I hate to say that. I mean, I'll go on record as saying that some of us gave him the benefit of the doubt in 2007, and he turned out to be a colossal disappointment in terms of institution building. You know, the second time obviously was worse than the first time. But let's not go there about trying to, you know, kind of retrospectively look at EBK's tenure as anything that was beneficial to our country at all, because I don't think it is. If it was, I would state it here unequivocally, because he was somebody I gave the benefit of the doubt in 2007 and turned out to be a huge, huge disappointment.
So if you're
not
saying
personally, but to the country as a whole.
So if you're saying that, and
Yes.
Sidi putting it, and in fact, citing the former president of America, giving accolade or claiming the former president and the country then to be one of the models of democracy in Africa.
I never heard Obama mention Sierra Leone as a model of democracy. What Obama said in Accra when he visited was that Africans should be more invested in building institutions.
Strong institutions.
And strong institutions and not place our faith in personalities. And EBK is the reverse of that. And even now that he's in power, he's trying to do what he couldn't do while in power. But let me not get derailed by that. Let me go to my friend here, the minister, you know, and some of the claims that he made and about the baseline where we started. JMB was not the baseline, my brother. JMB did not bring democracy to this country. There was Bintu Mani 1 and Bintu Mani 2. They kicked against democracy. You know who brought democracy in this country? It's not one individual. It was the students. It started in 1977, right? With a demonstration at Probe College, followed by No College, No School, then taken over by the women's movement. JMB was very late in the game. I personally was a discussant at the launching of John Hirsch's book. John Hirsch was America's ambassador to Sierra Leone at the time. He wrote a book on diamonds and democracy in Sierra Leone. And in that book, he claimed that the junta at the time was very reluctant to hand over power. And all their actions indicated that. So let's just debunk this notion that JMB birthed democracy in this country. That's definitely not the case. Well, let me run down some of the other points that the minister raised. I think the point on the repeal of the criminal law, libel law, is spot on. I think that was a good development, that they got rid of that law, and I think they should be applauded for that. Again, but we can talk about a free press. The press can be free. But is it thoroughly compromised? Where you have brown envelopes running all over the place. You know, some journalists have made, you know, a good name, or rather a wealth for themselves through, you know, there are a few good journalists still remaining. I'm not disputing that at all. But it has, you know, all it takes is a few rotten apples here and there.
So you're saying that space is also being corrupted?
Oh yes, just like civil society. You know, most of the civil society organizations have been hijacked. You know, they have been captured. They cannot resist capture.
Just out of curiosity, is there any institution that might serve as a beacon of hope to protect Sierra Leone's democracy, in your estimation?
I think the Auditor General's office, I think, is a transparency institution, or accountability institution that should be strengthened. I could have said the same about the ACC, but I'm not that gung-ho on the ACC at all. And the war against corruption, I think anybody can tell you that corruption is rampant in this country. I mean, it's not just about officials. It's those at the bottom, at the top, from both sides. I mean, you even look at the educational system. You hear a lot of talk today about cash for grades. and things of that nature. You look at the police force. I mean, their corruption is blatant. Has the ACC ever done anything about that? The police pull you over all the time trying to shake you down. That's the kind of practice that should be stopped, because when you violate traffic laws, you should be issued a ticket, pay that fine, and that money can be used to build roads and pay teachers. That's what they do elsewhere. But here they pocket the money and they keep, But let me get back to the minister's point on the destabilizing proclivities of the APC. That when they're out of power, they tend to pursue a destabilizing agenda. I think, grudgingly, there may be some truth to that, Mr. Tunis. Again, I hold no brief here for either party, because I don't think there's much disagreement between these two parties as to how to govern. It is about who should govern, okay? But going back to the destabilizing proclivities, let's kick back to 1968 and bring it forward, right? After Albert Magai lost power, right? And before the Bangura coup, not the Bangura coup, the Emadou Rogers and Patrick Conte coup that brought in Brigadier Bangura and the APC. The APC were plotting an insurrection launched from Guinea at that time. If you read Cox's book on civil-military relations in Sierra Leone, he makes that point very clear. Under Momo, when Momo was kicked out, and that's the irony of the decadence of political leadership in this country, that Momo, against whom the rebellion was launched, eventually found themselves with the very rebels that were fighting against him. He was in the bush with them, after all, when he ran away from jail because he had been incarcerated, as a collaborator after Kaba, had been. So even Momo, when he had been deposed, they contributed to the mobilization of the Sierra Leone army, because they had these renegade soldiers that they were training, that they had within the army itself, that were undermining the war efforts of the NPRC. And there's a record, about that. And bringing it forward recently, I believe the August 10 incident, there's genuine concern in this country. There's genuine hardship and suffering in this country that could lead people to take to the streets to protest. You don't get much by way of democratic rights or advanced movements. Social protest movements are very important. But what happened on August 10 is that it became criminalized. And the incumbent government is claiming that the APC elements were involved in instigating that it was an insurrection. I would not call it an insurrection per se, because right now we're hearing that even some Wagner group members, or the Russians, were somewhat have identified Sierra Leone as one of those countries that are targeted for destabilization. I don't know if the minister
I've read it.
Has read that.
I've read it.
So again,
somebody was speculating
yes,
that might be one of them.
I'm not going to pay much credence to that. But, there's something to this. But one last point I want to make that the minister said in terms of touting some of the gains of the government is in the area, I believe, of education.
Yeah.
Right? I've been trying to help in my own little way in education.
I will appreciate
by
that.
Donating books to schools, colleges, and libraries all over the country. And in my recent trip up country, I've been going there all the time, the north and south and so forth. Some of the complaints I'm getting from teachers is that they are now being forced to do some of the same things that they were being prosecuted for doing. That they were being put at falsifying grades, trying to falsifying grades so that you show that your school is improving. The culture that they're setting now is a culture in which people want to pass exams without taking exams, without studying. And they are perpetrating that. But getting back to the real issue of free education, education is never free. You might pay the fees, but the non-tuition costs are going to outweigh even the tuition fees. I help students here at all levels, in my own little way. And I know education is not free. Free education is analogous to free healthcare in this country, right? There's a lot of good that is meant, but a lot is required in the delivery. A lot is wanting in the delivery. If I want my kid to have a good education, If I want my sister or my daughter or whoever needs free health care, I'm not going to send them to a free healthcare clinic.
Why is that?
Or because the quality is poor.
Would you not want to commend the government's
strides,
striving to ensure
if it works?
It's work in progress, like democracy consolidation. We'll get there.
Okay, slowly. But what I'm saying that is we should not begin to tout it as if it's already working. You know, we already believe that we are there when we just kind of creep into it.
It's working, but it might not be perfect. It's working. The aspiration is to perfect it.
So let's go to the education, to the free
quality. Rwanda started the same way.
Today, we have already now data is saying we have about 2.7 million kids in school. Retention rate is high, enrollment is also high, and the passing rate again, the quality data is saying where. From the data is saying, it's good, we're doing well, we're building back the foundation of our education. And he talks about it's not being free. Yeah. I mean, so government is saying we're paying tuition for the kids. We're giving free learning and teaching materials. Yes. We're also providing core textbooks. So are these not efforts to put education where the minister is trying to put it now for us?
I will never discount anyone making an effort to improve education, be it the government or be it ordinary individuals. I will never discount that. Right? Little drops will add up someday. That's my belief. But you have a lot of situations where kids cannot even get their grades at the end of the year if they don't go pay something to the teacher. You know, there's all kind of stuff going on, you know, at all levels, in the primary school, the secondary school. Again, you're not going to blame it just on government per se. And eradicating some of that culture that has set in the schools and the universities is going to be a tall order.
Would you want to bring government in on the pay of the teachers? You also have some teachers in community schools that are not being paid by government, but also all they need is when parents or the pupils of the community schools at the end they get paid. And many teachers don't have PIN codes either.
Okay, that's a point you raise, but again, it corrupts the whole educational system. You know, when teachers don't get paid, they go on Operation Pay Yourselves, like the soldiers used to do, right? That's pretty much what it is, right? And that is very damaging to the educational system because you find that at all levels of education in this country today.
All right. So Sidi, you listen to Minister Swaray's submission. The indicators he cited are pretty good. It appears, I mean, there is some stellar performance in upholding democracy and consolidating it from the government's perspective.
Well, thank you very much. I see the minister throwing in figures, but at the same time trying to defend the sources of those figures, or but
no, Sidi, make your point. I'm here. I'll come back.
I am glad that Prof already addressed the issue of democracy because we all know that it is the 1991 Constitution that ushered in the current democracy that we have in Sierra Leone. And of course, in 1991, it wasn't President Bio that was in power.
I'll come back to that.
In any case, President Bio delayed our democracy. Their NPRC coup delayed our democratic process. And the coup against Strasser even further delayed our democratic process. I don't have to go into that because Prof already laid out the circumstances there for us all to understand.
So I'll zero in on that when I come back.
Let us come to the criminal libel law, which in fact they introduced in 1965, when they wanted to become a repressive regime, just as they introduced the one-party, system that we now came to know. The process of decriminalizing that, started, with the previous administration, of course, but they completed that.
But never fulfilled.
But look at what happened.
It never went to cabinet.
They repealed and they reintroduced the criminal libel law, which they have attempted to use to go after
the
cybercrime laws. I mean, which they have attempted already to use to go after, politicians like us, and which they are now using to even eavesdrop or censor, our communications, eavesdrop on our communications, what we do with our mobile communications and all of that. So that is even more draconian than the criminal libel law that they had. And cybercrime law, by the way, has so many areas it ought to be focusing on, not just, what communication the politicians are involved in. You talk about inclusive growth and development. Prof, I will not back down on the fact that President Ernest Bai Koroma did quite a lot in terms of inclusivity and in terms of even transforming and strengthening our democracy. Let us take the audit service, which we are acclaiming here very much. The strength and independence that audit service now enjoys until Lara Taylor Pierce was taken out of office all came under President Ernest Bai Koroma. Lara Taylor Pierce and her audit service had the free will, to do what was right, to hold everyone accountable, including the office of the president. I mean, the fallout came in when when these people could not bear. They keep talking about democratic. They keep talking about democratic accountability, but they don't want the president to account for what he's spending, and that is where the problem lied. And the interesting thing is, Lara was taken out few weeks of her publishing that year's audit report. And immediately she was kicked out of office. What has happened? Now the audit service is telling us that they couldn't audit the office of the president because it did not meet the threshold. What threshold? And you keep talking about democratic accountability. Accountability should not be selective, my dear.
But if that office,
bring back our Auditor
that office
General.
that many Sierra Leoneans look forward to in terms of accountability, in terms of in fact giving hope to transparency. If the office is saying that that office at this time did not meet the threshold for it to be audited, then is it something?
What threshold? Where has audit got to do with threshold? We are talking about spending taxpayers' money. Money is from consolidated funds. What threshold do you need to account for public money? None. None exists.
So you're saying
so there is no excuse.
You say that was just an excuse to.
It is an excuse to escape accountability, clearly. And we come to the Anti-Corruption Commission. Before Ernest Bai Koroma ascended to office, the ACC did not have the prosecutorial power. There was enough government interference. Before you prosecute, you have to first go seek permission from the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Ernest Bai Koroma, amended the act to give the APC the prosecutorial power. And we all know that during his tenure, several of his ministers were prosecuted, and brought to book for, alleged corrupt practices. We are not seeing that under this administration. I can cite instances wherein government officials have been involved in corruption and they have let loose. Take, for example, the rice supplied for the school feeding program. When the Minister of Labor then, who was the Minister of Labor now, who was then Minister of Education, was prosecuted, the matter was in court. And clearly, at some point, the ACC went back and said, you know what, we don't have enough evidences. We are withdrawing this matter.
No, the fact
of the matter is
they
stopped the trial. They stopped the trial.
Because there was an issue with a standalone judge or a trial.
The trial had already started, Samuel. The man had already been indicted. The trial had already started.
And he was suspended from office.
And they stopped the trial. But the fact of the matter is, rice came in, rice was shared among government officials, and those who could not, at that time did not utilize they were asked to bring back the rice. Why was that hidden from the general public? This was rice brought for students, not for politicians, but it was shared among the politicians, depriving the students. And now you look at other cases. Somebody takes money from donors, put the money in his personal account, not consolidated account, registered a business to his home address, and used the mediators the owners of the business as mediators to collect the money from the donor.
Who is this person?
And then the person is out, let loose,
Who is
and
this
you
person?
go after somebody else.
Who is this person?
You go after somebody else to prosecute it. So, I mean, that is not an ACC.
These are loose allegations.
Not,
They can't name the people.
That is not an ACC. Ali Kabar.
I don't know about that.
It is very clear where we
You
know.
have an opportunity to say that in court.
That we know.
Say it in
that
court.
is very clear. I mean, these are some of the instances that we're seeing. You know, Samuel, our country, is seeing a decline in our democracy. Transparency and accountability is dissipating under this administration. The rule of law is being, look at the manner in which opposition figures have been treated in this country. We're talking about freedom of speech. Every single opposition member that has been arrested and locked up has been because of what they have said, not what they have done. I am one case in point. Spent 3 months, 3 days in CID simply because of what I said. I did not go against any law. I was not a threat to security.
But you can clarify.
But then which incitement? To say that the people of this country will lawfully remove the government from power, how is that inciting? That is inevitable. It is something that is bound to happen. Mr. Minister, you talked a lot. Give me time to talk.
Who determines I'm talking a lot?
Go ahead.
Going further, I always say this. Inclusivity in governance is not about how many tribesmen you appoint into office. It is about how you take development to every Sierra Leonean, which is why, under the presidency of Ernest Bai Rahman, not a single district in this country did not experience some form of, development, whether in terms of.
Did you ensure equal distribution of
yes, Samuel. Yes. Let me land. Let us take, for example, the Free Healthcare Initiative. Before the Free Healthcare Initiative was introduced, a thorough assessment was done across this country as to one, the health, infrastructure in terms of hospitals, number of PHUs, and how equipped those hospitals and health facilities were, medical stores assessment, those were done. And then we also came to human resource in health. It was on that basis, in fact, that the Human Resource, the Health Service Commission was established, because we wanted to improve the human resource for health. And we went around and did a lot of infrastructural development. Several health centers were built, hospitals were built. I remember very well, one of the first maternity hospitals built in this country was in Pujong district. Kailon has the biggest pediatric hospital built in this country. Before the free healthcare was introduced, we ensured that every theater, before the introduction, we went to some theaters, they had to use, torchlights for operations. We had to ensure that every theater was equipped before the free healthcare was introduced. So we did assessment, we did the infrastructural adjustment before they were introduced, and we saw the result. It improved access, it saves many lives, and maternal mortality went down in this country.
At this point, Sidi, what would you handle, or how would you handle the claims you're making differently? That now democracy has been undermined, democracy is under siege under the current regime, and those indicators you're using to do your assessment, how would you have handled those situations if you were in government?
When we were in governance, that is why I'm saying some of the things that we did to ensure that inclusivity, and our democracy was improved. There was constant engagement with the opposition, right? To a point that at every opportunity that the former president had, in terms of tensions, in terms of appointments, the opposition will be engaged to make sure there was some form of consensus before ever those appointments were made, just so that we can continue to have trust, to a point that when the opposition leader in parliament wanted to run for the vice presidency of the African Union Parliament, who led the campaign? It was former President Nkrumah. that led the campaign to a point that Honorable Bernadette Lahai was elected. We also saw people. Bobo Sawyer was appointed Deputy Minister of Health. He was still a member of the SLP when he was appointed when he was appointed Deputy Minister of Health. I mean, we saw developments taken all across this country. A lot of investments were done in the judiciary, by the way, to a point they were uplifted in terms of their services, in terms of their conditions of service, just as the entire civil service was uplifted at that time. Minimum wage was 25,000. It was lifted. And these are all, you know, and let me come to this.
Please.
I mean, you've kept me waiting
I see
forever.
the minister keep talking about fuel prices, this, that is COVID. Come on. When Ernest Bai Krumah came into power in 2007, in 2008, we experienced the highest global commodity in prices. The price for fuel rose to $145 a barrel. At that time, in 2008, you can go do your findings. We were still able to keep the price per liter at 3,750 leones. Since 2018, the price for barrel of oil has never reached $100 a barrel. And here we are, paying close to 22,000 a liter. So it has nothing absolutely to do with global, oil market. It has to do with the fact that we just cannot manage our economy due to, over-bloated.
So you're blaming it on leadership.
Oh yes.
So let's make
overbloated wage bills,
forever.
excess spending on trips and other things. I mean, to a point that we cannot fake receipts for hotels, accommodations overseas.
So let me just hurriedly run through some of the very, very loose-gaseous allegations it's made, because they really have no statistical backings, no nothing. I've spoken about the things I've spoken about, and I've been able to quote facts and figures from trusted sources, right? So let us start with the Auditor General. In our dispensation, we have done more for the audit service by way of budgetary allocations than any other regime before us, right? We've been able to do that. But where we sense unprofessionalism, where we sense bias, right? I mean, government had to take the decision to send them on suspension. I mean, the beauty about democracy, like Professor Jimmy Kandeh and others spoke about, is citizens must have recourse to alternative means to establish their innocence or otherwise. But I dare say, since the constitution of that tribunal, Madam Lara Pelos-Pierce has not missed an opportunity to ask for adjournments on a very, very continuing basis. To an extent, the matter has not been concluded. 2 weeks ago, right, the chairperson actually spoke out loud and clearly that they were frustrating her efforts by asking for perpetual adjournments. So this has to be noted. It is not because government does not want to bring the matter to an end, but because there are clearly conflicts of issues on professionalities and many other issues. But again, that matter is before a tribunal, a competent tribunal, where Madam Taylor-Pierce and her colleague have a fair chance to bring in their legal representation and what have you else. So that is very important. I also wish, on the other allegations made by my friend, so the danger, the tragedy that has befallen this country is that we have lost the reading culture. Even people in policy positions do not read. And where some of them manage to read, they don't do so with profit. CD has always brought this issue forward of the cybercrime law. Let me now give a little bit of free education. I think this is becoming imperative here. When we landed the fiber cable here, it was part of the conditions precedent, because anywhere you land a fiber cable, you are expanding the footprints of data, digital optic. So it's important, and they always go hand in hand with increased crime, cyber, digital crimes. So that was part of the conditions precedent. The APC came, they didn't do it. Of course, fast forward, they even fell out with the World Bank over the management of those funds. Right? So when we came in, they already had no relationship with my ministry. After 3 years or so of strategic engagement, I'm pleased to know that the World Bank is back and they've supported us for digital transformation projects. The key and critical issues that this thing seeks, the cybersecurity and crime law seek to address include protection of critical national infrastructure. We have seen in other countries, they will disrupt their electricity, they will disrupt their water system, they will disrupt many things, right, using cybercrime. Maybe at the risk of repeating myself, I've said this before, and let me say it again. I listened to Nuhu Ribadu, the Nigerian ACC czar. He said in the course of an investigation some time ago in his tenure, he stumbled upon a group of Nigerians who had robbed a bank $540 million. The bank collapsed and the bank governor died. That was cybercrime. You will need a law like this to be able to prosecute, right? So Sierra Leone, we say, when I took over my first outing to the AU headquarters, Sierra Leone was among a list of countries that was named and shamed for not having enacted a cybersecurity and crime law. And there's an ECOWAS directive on same, right? So we'll go there after the Jamboree, we'll come here, we see it, and we'll pat each other on the back, we don't take action. So one of the reasons is the protection of critical information infrastructure. You're talking about banks. Do you imagine with all the online banking and other things, somebody were to hack the central bank or something? The things we are saying will change the narrative. So that's one of the reasons, just in case you need to know that. The second reason has to be prevention of the abusive use of computer systems. Right now, I know in other countries, people are making millions out of digital space. In Sierra Leone, when we use it, we call for war, we call for the dismemberment of this country, we call for takeover of government or all of that.
So what does the abuse
just a minute. You talk about online child protection. I mean, pornography, online child pornography and all of those things, right? Racist and xenophobic remarks. This law is modeled against some of the world's most seminal legislations. The Budapest Convention, the AU Malabo Accord, the ECOWAS directives, and all the other seminal legislations around the world. So human rights and freedoms are critical hallmarks of this legislation. And just so that we don't miss out on this, this law was popularly approved by all the members of parliament in a very resounding motion. The APC is there, other members of parliament are their paramount chiefs. So this law is a product of our collective ownership as Sierra Leoneans. This was not one law that was rammed through anybody's throat, right? Then, of course, you have facilitation of international cooperation. Cyber crimes, for the most part, are perpetrated by people domiciled outside that country. I mentioned just now the issue of the Nigerians who sat in Nigeria and robbed a bank in Brazil. You all know the story of Hush Puppy and others, right? So all of these things will require international cooperation to be able to bring those people to book. I think that's very important to note. Let us stop problematizing this law. You did that and you failed, while we are canvassing public opinion to have it supported, right? I think that is very important to note.
Samuel, just to quickly bring the minister back. I did say...
Is that with your permission, sir?
I did say...
Yes, go ahead.
I did say that the cyber crime law has so many things important to address. But the fact of the matter is they have not focused on those things. I mean, he just highlighted issues of money laundering and all of these. They are focused on using it to go after the opposition, and they have already failed on their first attempt.
Okay, so let me come back. I mean, it's really on my parry there.
Don't forget that I took part in developing that.
Let me tell you.
I know what is in there.
Let me tell you. I mean, Jimmy and viewers. The disappointment to the Sierra Leone opposition is I was in opposition before President Bill shot to power in 2018. We had our regular Wednesday press conferences where we had alternative policies that were sold to Sierra Leoneans, right? This opposition is always bent on causing one form of, to disrupt the system, right? And in democracies, for alternative governments, you should be marketing alternative ideas, not always threatening hail and brimstone. Anyway, so let me make a few passing comments, even as I make my substantive comments much later. Nobody said President Bill is the only person who has ever watered the seeds of democracy, Jimmy. You have quoted Ambassador Hashi's Diamonds and Democracy. I've also read that book. In that book, he paid very glowing tributes to President Julius Maada Bio, then as military head of state. He didn't believe, the whole world didn't believe that a young officer with all the trappings of power and with the military will hand over power until he did. You remember that bit of it? So let us not shortchange his credit I mean, it has a place very firmly in our history in terms of its democratic credentials. But you remember he said that, right? That's in that book that you quoted.
Yeah,
I've also read the same book. But I mean, it was not in your interest to quote it. So I just wanted to bring that out.
You did not have a choice.
Well, that's a debate for another day. You even mentioned 1977. It could go as far back as, you know, that the West African Students Union and others and all of those things. It could go way, way, way back. So let's leave that. Let's leave that and have that conversation. Democracy is backsliding. Like I say, when you have an opposition that doesn't want to discuss ideas, when you have an opposition, you know, whose only way to power has to be to subvert the state, to torpedo the process. I mean, there was a midterm process. You know, the laws were very clear. We asked for a midterm. They spent all their energy and resources campaigning in every nook and cranny to tell their citizens not to make themselves available for the midterm census. Right? That was what they did. They even tore the proclamation. I was there.
The process was not,
it became a fisticuff. That is not how opposition parties should behave. In civilized democracies, when you have a serious opposition, you go to court.
Your response to
by the way, we went to court.
That the government is not inclusive in the sense engaging opposition politicians, because also other opposition.
No. You have an opposition that does not like ideas marketing. You like
Samuel,
no, but I'm still being protected. CD, I'm not going to allow you to disrupt like in all other things. No. He's going to wait for me. Except if we've lost, if we've lost.
We're just having a civil conversation. We actually interjection is allowed. Just so it's civil.
Exactly.
No. So I did mention this government, unlike many others, I said President Bill is very interested in building a sustainable democracy, right? Just every year, I mean, he hosts events with the media. I mean, we have always said, when we criminalize, we ask for competition. We are not asking for favors. It is just that we believe the press has a properly run and properly managed media space will contribute meaningfully to national development. We've said that. Since independence, the president has opened himself up to a more media scrutiny than any other, than all of them put together, in fact. Right? So that means we want, because democracy is about voice as well. You want to hear the citizens, what do they think about particular issues? This man, you know, we have seen leaders come and go. The most recent that comes to is we had to launch campaigns across this country to ensure that elections date was announced. The international community was involved. They had to give all through cajolery and all kinds of things for an election date to be announced, because the scheme was after me, more time. It morphed into various kinds of campaigns. President Bill announced an election calendar over 1 year ago so that opposition parties could have time to organize themselves, to put their house in order and compete. I understand, you know, but this is part of the democratic transition. I quit my job in May 2015. I was at Sierra Leone. I wanted to run for the position of National Secretary General. We had already slated an election time a month or two after my resignation. But because the SLPP is used to internal democracy, our party kept going to court. It took almost 3 years, right? I had left my job in anticipation that the elections will be 3 months. This is what the APC is not used to. They now blame government for their own members taking them to court and asking for their voices to be heard. Welcome to democracy. It's a very bitter pill to swallow, my brother. We have been down that path, and we are very used to it now. You know, we are maturing. We are maturing. Welcome to democracy and good governance. Let me say this. CD, you had all the time in the world, so please give me some time to just. So we have also mentioned democracy being inclusive and ensuring that everybody, you know, enjoys the dividends of democracy. You know, we have also ensured, CD, and just so that you know this, colleagues, when we took over, you had about 370,000 Sierra Leoneans connected to the internet. Today, that's, you know, people who can do social media and what have you. Today, you have 2.67 million people. That was at the end of last year. That means we are giving more people voices to speak out, to critique us. Nobody has ever been arrested. I remember something, Bomaya or something. She posted something in the last administration. She was taken to court. Nobody has suffer that kind of thing. Even though you have a lot of irresponsible free speech out there, because when you call for the dismemberment of your country, when you call for war, when you call for all of these things,
Samuel,
right? And when, look, listen.
You know, Samuel, I don't know which country the minister lives in. Really.
Let me just wrap this up.
I don't know which country.
Let me just wrap this up. Very, very recently, you know, the APC conventions held in McKinney. All kinds of vitriolic songs were sung there. You remember Basta Peking? You remember the abuse of the first family? I mean, look, the elections, Mami Cause is going to be part of the agenda. We should, as serious Sierra Leoneans, right-thinking Sierra Leoneans, stop the APC in their tracks. They have to take that off the table.
Right.
Let them bring alternative policy dialogue to the table and let us move forward.
Sidi, quickly.
So leave that to the Sierra Leoneans to decide.
So until then, you continue to do Mamikos?
So who to keep in track?
Until then, you continue to use the Mamikos?
Who to keep in track? I mean, the issue of Mamikos, Rado, you say
tell me about it.
You have your executive members who have stood at your party office and levied invectives.
Let us skip the conversation, gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a shame when the party leaders stand there, including the flag bearer, dancing to Basta Peking. Is that the country we want to be quick to the next generation? It's a shame.
Executive members.
I'm not aware. Bring it forward like I brought yours for on tape. I brought yours for on tape.
Calling people names.
I brought yours for on tape.
Calling people ayampis. Calling people all sort of.
I am peace. If you are a thief, you are a thief.
So they go ahead and respond to the issues.
If you are a thief, you are a thief. But cause Basta Peking, I don't want to grow. I don't want to see my kids grow up in a society where you can frivolously use invectives.
You have the right to call someone a thief. What makes you think that somebody else
can dance to Basta Peking? Well, I understand it's sanctioned by your
does
party.
not have the right to call him the name that he wants to call him.
Prof. So Prof,
let me come. So let me come.
Please go to the issue.
I mean, first of all, let me state this. You know, when some of us come on national television or radio, I personally care about not only that I care about my personal credibility and integrity, I also do care about the reputation of the party. So whatever I state here, I state them with facts. So the idea that I'm just throwing in buzzes, I've given you instances, I've given names,
data,
I've given you
credible
facts,
data, verifiable data.
Putting in fuzzy mathematics or fuzzy figures does not make them, credible.
Oh, really?
Let me just make that very clear.
Oh, so you don't believe the MCC 98% for freedom of information?
I mean, if you're talking about
94% for rights?
You keep talking about MCC. The fact of the matter is these figures are provided to MCC by institutions. And let me say this, you keep saying it is only under your government that, MCC have given you all of these accolades. The only government that has ever received money from MCC for doing well is the APC government.
Threshold.
Under Ernest Bai Koroma. Yes, you have not received any. You have been getting all these calls for the past 3 years with nothing. That tells a lot.
Just so that you understand the process. American taxpayers' money. Don't spend like drunken sailors.
Don't interrupt.
There are processes.
Let me proceed. Let us be civil.
I needed to give you that.
When you intervene, you are not being civil. I understand.
Let me come in.
When intervention was not being civil.
I need to make this very clear because Rado keeps talking about threats to administration, threats. The only threat that we have had to the citizenry of this country is from them. I mean, we've seen the presidential guards go to the Paremba Road and massacre inmates, defenseless inmates. They went to McKinney, massacred defenseless, citizens. Tombo, massacred defenseless citizens. On August 10th, we all saw the videos. Some people were dragged from inside their houses and shot. We saw the videos. So the only threat that we have had to the citizenry of this country is from them. And they keep talking about, we have to keep them in their tracks. We have, yes, you may have used guns against the citizens of this country that, have no means of defending themselves. But let me tell you this, Rado, soon and very soon, they will use their own weapons against you. Their fingers, their ballot papers, their ballot boxes. will be used against you just as you use your guns against
All
them.
right, let me
I
bring
can
in,
guarantee
let me
you that.
bring in Prof. So, Prof, you've listened to the two gentlemen.
What?
And I really love you to comment on this. So, the fact that when we talk about some of these issues, I mean, there's always this easy ride for trading of accusations, trading accusations. Who's done it better? Who's not done it better? And it's with those accusations being traded between APC and SLP, how do we lay the tracks for a more matured democracy? Prof.
Yeah, it seems like these two main parties in a frenzy trying to one-up each other. When one is in power, they justify what they're doing in terms of the other party having done the same thing when they were in power, with some, differences here and there. For instance, the parliamentary debacle, expulsions where, kind of rationalized, explained in terms that I think the APC did something, similar to the SLPP when they were in the opposition. So it's this one-upping each other that they seem to be up to, which is not good for democracy, because the opposition party has to present a manifesto or a blueprint of what they want to do that will be different from the incumbent party, that can tell the electorate that this is what we're going to do, and it will be so much better than what you have now. But they might say that for all you want, and when they get to power, how they govern, pretty much it's the same. Like I said, it's not about who governs. It's about, it's not about how they govern. It's about, who governs. So in terms of maturing our democracy, right, there are some objective indicators that we can point at that may lead some to argue that maybe our democracy is better today than it was, even though I don't buy into that argument. What are these objective indicators? There are those who argue that if you have a true turnover in political office, an alternation of parties in power,
right?
The SLPP has been kicked out, the APC has been kicked out. We've had two alternations. But it's not an alternation of incumbents who were running, who were on the ballot. Because the parties were thrown out. But an incumbent was not on the ballot in 07, and was not on the ballot again, the last election. So, but that's an encouraging sign. Another encouraging sign is that the duration, right? We've been at it for a much longer period, and the argument is that the longer that you try democracy, the better the chances that you may be able to sustain, democracy. Another argument, has to do with the fact that you've tried it before. And if you've tried it before and failed, like we did in the 60s, and we're going at it again, that the chances are improved the second time around. But there are dark clouds out there, that may form a kind of countervailing stream, against some of the, the positives, that I've just cited. And the strongest countervailing factor is enduring mass poverty in this country. Poverty will never prevent the emergence of democracy, but all the mainstream literature points out that endemic poverty can stifle or prevent the consolidation of democracy. Economic development is critical, because with economic development, people come to place their faith in democracy, that democracy can improve the space, create the accountability that will allow resources to be plowed in the right areas that will be beneficial to the population as a whole. So poverty continues to be a very, very important obstacle to democratic consolidation. Another obstacle that we've touched upon here before, not today, but it's the bipolarization of the electorate. We don't have the kind of cross-cutting pressures and cleavages, but I think, Honorable Tunis, as I pointed out before this panel started, he and his brother are quite interesting example of how cleavages can cross-cut, that your identity should not always dictate your party loyalty or your party membership. We're from the center.
I'd like to congratulate him. He's the only person choosing, from that part of the country in the Usum Express national team.
But I think we need more
Yeah,
people,
more of them.
More people from the south identifying
And the east.
with APC, and more people from the north.
We have that. When you look at our national executive, it's very variegated. It's all inclusive. He is the only Southeasterner in that executive. It's a Usum Stars Express.
And how inclusive?
And that is what governance will look like in the most unlikely event they ever dream of forming a government here.
Development being across the country?
Free quality education targets every Sierra
Gentlemen, let's allow
Was the free
Professor.
healthcare only?
Free quality.
Professor, go ahead, please.
You know,
Go ahead.
Professor, sorry that
Go ahead, Prof.
I needed to just.
Okay, democracy is also consolidated when the gap between formal rules and the behavior of the politicians are closed. The gap becomes closer because there's a huge chasm between what the rules dictate and how the politicians behave. And that prevents consolidation. And to understand that properly, I always tell my students that one starting point for understanding politics and society in Sierra Leone is to recognize the quadruple bifurcation of our polity. And what do I mean by that? Because this bifurcation exists at about 4 levels. At the level of the state, right, you have bureaucratic channels, right? But you also have patronage networks that exist alongside those bureaucratic channels. And get which one is more effective? The patronage networks. If you want a passport, you don't want to waste your time going to the passport office. If you know a minister here, he might just make a call and you get your passport the next day, right? Those are the networks. But those networks undermine the effectiveness of the bureaucratic channels. And when you want to build state capacity, make the state more effective, which you need for democracy and development, it is not the patronage networks that you should strengthen. It is the bureaucratic channels. You also look at the level of regime. Move away from the state. The regime is about the norms and principles of the political system. It is not that we don't, act according to rules.
What's the effect when the patronage networks are more influential, are more active and very effective?
It undermines the bureaucracy. That's why we don't have a meritocratic bureaucracy, right? It's weighed down by patronage. But when you look at the rules of the game, you have the formal rules of democracy, the formal rules that dictate the rule of law, equity, justice, and what have you. But then you have the informal rules. The informal rules are based on clientelism, on patronage. They tend to undermine, they are more particularistic, these informal rules, and undermine the universalism of democracy. So the rules, the informal rules support the claim. More effective, that's where politics takes place. And the civil society organizations that have been enfeebled over the years because you have the inroading of these organizations by these parochial, loyalties and calculations coming from outside these organizations. So it makes it very difficult to consolidate democracy where you have that huge gap between formal rules and informal behavior.
And that's the practice currently.
Yes, that's what we have here. You got to close that gap. In fact, one theorist, Guillermo O'Donnell, who writes mainly in Latin America, made that point that consolidation is not about becoming a liberal democracy, which some Western orthodoxy tends to stipulate. That consolidation is really about closing the gap between formal rules and informal behavior. But people like Ottawa and others have argued that really consolidating democracy is about institutionalizing power. And that in Africa, the reason we have these insurrections, these coups d'etats, these chronic instabilities, because power has not been institutionalized.
So how do we get the bureaucratic channels to work effectively? Because you look at some of these institutions, they're to be independent, they are to be, in fact, they're supposed to help consolidate the very democracy we want. But if that is being undermined by the patronage networks. What should we do to get the bureaucratic channels so that the institutions function? They understand that they have a role to consolidate the very democracy we all want.
I think that's where leadership comes in, right? there's a palpable lack of democratic elites in much of Africa, not just Sierra Leone. Their commitment to democracy is at best opportunistic. They tend to be more committed to democracy when they're in the opposition rather than when they're in power. In fact, one scholar argued that one of the problems in Africa, including Sierra Leone, is the absence of a political class that is committed to the liberal values that undergird, liberal pluralist democracy. It's not the elites, generally speaking, are not committed to some of these metrics of good governance and democracy we've been talking about, like transparency, which would be good for the public. If you're a corrupt official, public official, you don't even have to be in the state, but you're not going to subscribe to transparency. So the kind of value system that supports democracy is not a value system that is shared by the political class in Sierra Leone, and I'm not just zeroing in on one party, I'm talking about the political class, and in much of Africa as a whole. And if you don't have a value system among the political class that is supportive of democracy, it's very difficult to consolidate democracy. There's also the problem of the internal demand for democracy, which tends to be weak.
Can this be linked to the way we practice politics? So you have people who invest in political parties, helping political parties to gain power, and at the end of the day, it goes back to how do they get what they've invested in the political party. So instead of people appointed based on merit, you start to compliment and reward people instead of competence and character.
Yes. It's a pay-to-play kind of scenario where even in America, huge donors get appointed as ambassadors and what have you. It's not unique here, it's not unique here at all. But I think patronage is so embedded here. It is not like you don't have patronage elsewhere, even in the States or elsewhere, but it's like patronage is a fringe phenomenon. It's not the main driving force for appointments, for recruitment and so forth, for development projects. Patronage will seep in, but it's the exception and not the rule. In Sierra Leone, patronage is the rule, and patronage is ruining our institutions. It's undermining the effectiveness of our bureaucracy. It's making our state less effective. It contributes to the enfeeblement of public institutions. And even Fukuyama and others who wrote on governance and state building makes the forceful argument that state building is very important, but the way you build a state is not on the basis of patronage. You build a state on the basis of rules that apply to everybody, on universal rules, not the particularistic rules of patronage, clientelism, and so forth.
Is there hope that the practice can be changed over time?
But I think in poor societies like ours, a lot rides on leadership. If you have a transformative leader, which we have not yet had in this country, let nobody tell you that their politician is a transformative leader. We've never had one in this country. But if we have a transformative leader, they can change the narrative. They can change the narrative, but you've got to lead by example, not by mouthing platitudes and so forth. There have been leaders in Africa who are changing the narrative. They may not be full-fledged democracies. Rwanda is not a democracy. I will not consider Rwanda as a democracy. But it scores very high. It's one of the better governed states in Africa today. And much of that comes from the fact that there are very low levels of corruption.
Is it also possible?
And also the service delivery.
Is it also possible that we devise a model that works for Sierra Leone and put its governance structure into context and how it is done? So at the end of the day, we're able to attain, standards. You just mentioned Rwanda. We're able to just attain a
but you see,
position.
Rwanda has the type of meritocratic bureaucracy we don't have here, right? What we need here is not a liberal democracy, it's a social democracy. We have to try to become a social democracy before we can, strive to become a liberal democracy. That is if that's what we really want. So it's about having a developmental state, which Rwanda is. Perhaps the only developmental, Mauritius too can claim to be a development. That's the East Asian model. And the reason why they succeeded, among other factors, was the close kind of ties between the bureaucratic elites and the business elites with a goal to improving the development of their country. But they had a meritocratic bureaucracy. And the reason why they've had that kind of bureaucracy, it can be traced back historically to their Confucian past, where, the bureaucracy was considered very, very important. To walk in the Mandarinate of the bureaucracy was perhaps one of the highest achievements you can ever have. So yes, I mean, we can attempt to begin to consolidate democracy, but I think the best way we do that is to attack the problem of grinding poverty. Consolidate support for the state, for state power, which has not been institutionalized. The state is still weak. And the reason for that is that in order to strengthen state capacity, you have to build support for the state among the populace. You have to enhance the autonomy of public institutions so they can work in a manner that is unfettered by politicians, and so forth. But really addressing the problem of poverty. I think it was Amartya Sen who wrote a book on development as freedom, who made the very, very salient point that any poor country can make vast improvements in their lives of the people and help to consolidate democracy if their governments invest heavily in healthcare and education. All right. Those two important sectors.
Yeah, let's me.
Yes. I want you to have the final bite.
Okay.
Maybe you have Sidi. So Sidi, with all that we've discussed, with all that you have submitted here tonight, do you see hope? And how are the tracks being laid to consolidating our democracy and the practice of good governance? Are we getting the quality? If not, what can you do different if you have the opportunity?
I think we have to come back to our institutions. These institutions.
We have 3 minutes each, by the way.
These institutions are established to ensure that our democracy is strengthened, good governance is guaranteed, and the people of this country are clearly involved in decisions that will shape their lives. And, the manipulation of these institutions must stop. And also, we have to be very honest as government or as, political parties, civil societies, journalists, even investments and developments that we undertake, they must have value for money. It is not just a matter of, embarking on development for the sake of development. I mean, it is, very sad. And I cannot, the only way I can put it, it is kind of like, it is only mediocrity, for example, that will let somebody look at a fabricated airport terminal and call it a new airport. Seriously, I mean, those are the kind of standards that we should not accept as citizens of this country, especially wherein a price tag as whopping as $270 million is attached to it that you and I would now have to pay for. Those are the kind of things that we should not accept as citizens of this nation. I mean, and that is where the issue of value for money, honesty and sincerity in some of the, the things that we do as government in the name of bringing development for our people. We ought to really look at those things. I mean, we also have to have respect for our Constitution. The level of constitutional abuses that we have seen, is worrisome. And I only hope going forward, that will stop and citizens will begin to also have confidence in the fact that, their will be reflected in the upcoming general elections, because tensions are high, a lot of mistrust for state institutions, especially those that are responsible to manage our elections. So we must ensure
Thank you, City
that
Attorney
going
Prof.
forward, citizens' will are reflected, because I don't think they are willing and will be ready to accept anything
you've exhausted your
different from
3
that.
minutes. Mr. Minister.
Yeah, so thank you very much. It's difficult to see this time come to an end so soon. So I very, very, very much associate with Jimmy's call for support for the states among citizens. With support for the states among citizens, you will not have faceless politicians masterminding what later became the McKinney riots, in which sadly enough people lost their lives. This was a government generator that government wanted to deploy somewhere else in the north. And, unsuspecting members of the public were thrown onto harm's way to be in conflict with the law. Sadly enough, people died. So what responsible opposition parties do anywhere else is not only to milk the grievance, but also to build support for the state, right? Because someday you hope to take over the leadership of that state. You also ended on the note that any country that is very genuinely desirous of taking her people out of poverty have to invest very heavily in education and health. Well, we have started that journey. The journey of 1 million miles starts with a single step. We met a health expenditure spend at around 6%. Today it's 11.3% in 4 short years. So that means we clearly know maternal mortality has been brought down by 74.3%. We used to be, for the last 20 years, we used to be at the very bottom, anytime things like those were mentioned. So we are making progress. When it comes to education, Sierra Leone is spending about 22% of our budget. The free quality education is not a magic bullet, but it's clearly a commitment in progress. So it requires every part of the nation. You're talking about even the teachers, you're talking about parents, you're talking about civil society, everybody. I'm aware, I've heard about sex for grades, sexually transmitted grades and degrees at all levels. And this is very sad for our country. It's going to take us as a culture that we inherited. We have to fight it. Even if at the cost of losing friends in the process. Yeah. Now, of course, let me do this confessional statement in the interest of full disclosure. I worked at the airport. I was sacked by the APC in 2009, in August. Before then, we had just returned from Banjul. Banjul had decommissioned their DVOR, the Doppler omnidirectional radio range. It's some kind of aviation equipment you need for safe landing of aircraft. They had decommissioned a very old one that they no longer needed. Shamelessly, our management went to Banjul to beg them to come and commission here. President Bill has ended that shame and national disgrace by investing in an airport through a PPP model. Right. 2 things that underline: Sierra Leone is honestly and sincerely ripe for business. There's great investor confidence. And this airport, everybody, no matter whether you're opposition or what have you, because it will not be by opposition ticket. You buy your ticket, you fly out of here. So we have to do that. For these reasons, Sierra Leoneans have vowed to vote President Bill on the first ballot. No speed bump. No speed bump.
It's still not functional.
No, nothing. Let me have your it will be functional.
It's still not functional, by the way, because the very equipment
let me make which business is going to work.
It's not available.
This airport is going to be operational.
It's not available. And we have to pay. We have to pay $270 million.
My mama was a joke. $350 million. You have not bought land. You chopped the money already, even before you bought land.
Okay, sirs. I know
Sorry.
You are kind of partisan, and it's interesting to listen to the kind of give and take between the two of you guys. I think you are both confident that your turn will come someday.
My turn is here.
Your turn is now.
For national service. A turn for national service is here.
Come someday. So it's a kind of
someday it might be after 1 million years.
But just some few words here before we end today. I think the minister made the point about the importance of building support for the state, and I've made the point about how it is important to have an effective state if democracy and development are going to be possible. But people just don't support states blindly. They support states that make a difference in their lives.
Thank you.
So you support state, you build support for a state that is responsive to your needs. To your
Provided
interests,
electricity, you cut cables.
to your aspirations. So that's why social provision, in which some of the IMF gurus kind of, rail against that the state is too interventionist. The state has to be interventionist because our people are poor. To
Agreed.
lift them out of poverty, it has to be interventionist. And to the degree that its interventions are effective in changing lives, in improving lives, that is how you build support for the state. Not by externalizing the sovereignty of the state and allowing officials in Brussels to be making macroeconomic policy in our country. Now, it is said that the poor needs democracy the most, but it is the rich that can best afford it. So when you build wealth, when you promote economic development, you're improving the conditions, the fundamentals that will make democracy grow, and mature. But the thing we'll also have to keep in mind are the intersections between democracy, development, and governance. Bad governance undermines democracy. The lack of development makes it very difficult to consolidate, democracy. That's why some have argued that democracy must take up the challenge of development where authoritarian regimes have failed us, in Africa. We also lastly have to keep in mind that democracy is sometimes a parochializing phenomenon. It could lead people to...
Until next time, the show has been a YV on Sunday. My name is Samuel Wise Bangura. Until then, take care of yourself and have a lovely night and